welcome back. And we're getting ready to move into our second segment for today. But before we do so, we actually have some breaking news that we'd like to share with you at this time. We have been able to obtain a video of and confirm that sometime around midnight tonight, police officials were called, last night, were called out to the Deputy Prime Minister's home in Lord's Bank. They found a gray Mazda SUV on fire. That's the video that you're seeing there. We have confirmed that the vehicle is a government vehicle, and the fire actually did cause some damage to the DPM's home as well. The minister was at home at the time, and of course the police are currently investigating. We'll have full details on this story in our newscast tonight, but we just want to be able to confirm to you. We know we've been hearing the rumors since early this morning that it is true, and that's the footage that you have there, right? We're going to shift gears now, right?
Shifting gears a little bit, we're going to be talking to representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture. Today we have the CEO, Honorable Jose Alpuche, joining us. We have Ms. Melissa Almendarez, who is the FAO Liaison Officer acting today, and Mr. Guy Ramirez, who is the Acting Director of Development and Research. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasant good morning, and thanks very much for having us.
All right. We're preparing for World Food Day, but of course, before we move into that conversation, CEO, we'd really love to talk a bit about one of the first issues, the damage to the agricultural sector after Earl. We have been hearing numbers in terms of what the actual cost of the damage is. Let's talk specifically about the agricultural sector.
Our initial assessment had put it at $76 million. The ECLAC IDB team had put it at just a bit less, around $72 million in terms of the actual damages to production losses. So we were fairly spot on as it relates to the actual damage assessment the initial damage assessment that we did.
So it's 72 million.
Right.
Now, for the public, let's talk about how these numbers are calculated. Are you looking at downed crops as a result of the storm, or potential production inputs later on in the year?
It's actually an impact on immediate production.
Okay.
To a large extent. There are other knock-on effects, which there's a multiplier effect as it relates to the impact on the banking sector, etc., that we don't calculate. We're only looking at production losses.
Where are the areas that have been affected?
The Corozal district, as it relates to Little Belize, the Orange Walk had some damage, but the most severe damage occurred in the Belize district, in the Cayo district, and a bit in the Stand Creek districts. Corn impacted heavily, bananas, citrus, and vegetable production, which is small farmer-based industry, and that's the one we're paying very keen attention to as it relates to recovery, in terms of assisting them to recover as quickly as possible.
As it relates to the time span of recovery for the rest of the year, how's that looking?
Corn, in terms of mechanized corn production, will recover. Well, we will still have sufficient corn for domestic consumption, both for feed and for human consumption. We expect that, the harvest just started in the Cayo district. The yields are a bit lower than normal, but we still expect that we will have sufficient for that, and may still have some for export, but that is yet to be determined. The northern harvest doesn't start until later this month, but the yields are a bit lower because of damage. What will happen is that we'll probably be down about 20% in terms of corn production, which seems like not severe impact, but the reality is that the crop would have been a record crop in the terms of the number of acreage planted and what we had expected as yield. So in effect, the 20% down from last year, but the impact to farmer is a bit bigger than 20%.
Does this include the extended impact? If corn isn't in full supply, it impacts also animal feed and cost of animal feed and cost of the animal meat.
We will have sufficient. We will have sufficient corn to meet domestic
because
demand,
there was
both
a surplus.
for feed and food.
Okay.
As I said, the real issue is whether or not we would have a bit more to export, but that's yet to be determined.
Now, CEO, the agricultural sector has been taking blow after blow. If you look at the issues with banana, we've looked at issues with citrus, we've looked at issues with the shrimp farm, and each year there seems to be something that really not devastates, but makes a huge dent in terms of the revenues usually collected from agricultural export. This obviously would seem to be having the same effect again for another year.
Yes, we've had some impact, but we're down, but we're not out. First point, I think we really have to understand that certain sectors of the industry performing actually very well. But in terms of, if I could take the three issues that are really affecting us.
Yeah.
One is, and three of them are really beyond our control. We already discussed Hurricane Earl, which is one of them. We have HLB in citrus, and the virus, the bacterial outbreak in shrimp, which really has impacted us. The reality is that the shrimp numbers have really brought down the overall numbers, because we've had a decline from a high of about 90 million to somewhere around 15 million, and this year it will be a bit less. So that has really brought down the overall numbers in terms of the output from the sector.
The shrimp farm still haven't recovered as yet? I thought they said it was going to be one cycle and then they'd be able to...
No, what had happened, we had a delay with the brood stock and getting new stock into the farms commercially. But the issue is that this is not just a simple disease outbreak where you can dry out and clean. There's also a move for improved practices. In some cases, the farms are actually rebuilding some of their ponds, bringing in new techniques. I must commend the shrimp industry for what they've achieved. Out of the adversity, I think we'll end up with a far stronger industry going forward, in the sense that some farms will now have total recirculation of water, so they won't need to pull water from outside. A part of the bioremediation for the disease is actually the growing of tilapia. So now we will have the possibility of tilapia and shrimp being exported from what used to be just the shrimp industry. With the redesigned ponds, etc., the profitability should increase. So I think we'll end up with a far stronger industry coming out of this unfortunate disease outbreak. It is something that was totally beyond our control. And quite frankly, the whole issue of agricultural health is one of the big challenges going forward. And it's not only Belize. We have every other agricultural producer experiencing some of the same problems. The issue of we hear quite a bit on the Mayan King.
Yes.
But quite frankly, banana is a 9-month cycle in terms of production. And that went down last year. If we had not had the Hurricane Earl damage, banana would have been back into full production, actually exceeding what they were doing last year. We expect that even with Hurricane Earl, one of the major concerns at the time was whether we would have sufficient export to warrant the ship coming in. That luckily that hurdle was passed very early. Figures going down for this year, which is, but we believe that by the end of March, April next year, the industry should be back to full production. And
citrus greening?
Citrus greening is a more difficult one.
Yes.
In the sense that, yes, there are control techniques. We had a tremendous delay from we first detected the disease and the internal rift within the industry really stymied the investment that should have gone in. We're dialoguing with the industry players to try to see how best we could have them access money for replanting. The numbers will remain very low. Prices luckily are quite high and expected to remain that way for the foreseeable future. So there is a bit of well, there's quite a bit of optimism on that, but that's a very long, much more drawn out process.
Just to be clear with the citrus greening problem, we know there have been farms in other countries that have been almost wiped out completely. Is that part of the reason why the lessened quantity in Belize is still of such high value? Because it's we're more...
Right. The global market is far tighter than normal, simply because of, well, to a large extent because of HLB. And we have not been as successful as we'd want to be in terms of addressing the impact, but so have other countries. Florida, for example, a lot of their citrus being taken out permanently. So there will be room for growth, but with a tree crop like citrus, there's a 4 or 5 year delay after investment, and people take these decisions very well, with a lot of consideration, so it takes a bit of time.
Mr. Ramirez, in your Department of Research and Development, in the spirit of being proactive, countermeasuring damage to crop because of natural disasters, what are some of the priorities from your department?
Well, for example, our Research and Development unit works out of Central Farm, and a lot of what we do focuses on assisting small and medium farmers with preparing for really climate smart agriculture. So, for example, we have a cover structure program, which is similar to the greenhouse program that you would see in the US and other parts of the world. So we look at a lot of what we could assist farmers in terms of demonstrating, like I said, climate smart agriculture to be able to combat some of these issues that you could potentially face going forward. As you rightfully have been talking about, agriculture is very risky business, particularly with respect to the climate. We are one of the most vulnerable industries to weather and climate issues. So we work, for example, on designing irrigation systems, training farmers, designing and constructing greenhouses. Really, we look at technology that is available across the world and try to bring it home to Belize and scale it and look at costs and that sort of thing.
As it relates to the culture of the small business farmer, how do you get them on board with the new technologies, the different ways of really maximizing their business?
Yeah. Well, it's no secret in Belize that we do have an aging agriculture population. A lot of our farmers are 65 years and older. So the approach has to be one that is considered and tailored to be able to meet their needs. So as I said before, a lot of it is done practically. We're in Central Farm. You could physically come in and see the infrastructure being developed, see what are some of the potential benefits of the infrastructure, the investment that is made. For example, the National Agriculture and Trade Show grounds now has its own garden and demonstration site, which we hope to bring additional farmers into that location to be able to physically show them what we go for a lot in what we do is when we bring in farmers, for them to have that aha moment. This is what you're talking about. Yeah. This is how it works. This is where I could make my investment, and that is where I would like to see my farm in a year or two.
Now, if we bring it back to Earl just for a second, CEO, we heard you mention the vegetable stocks that have been affected. We're looking at a very closely approaching high season when it comes to demand, and that's Christmas. And we know traditionally there's usually a increase in price. We also know that at times we have had to import because it's not enough to meet the demand. Given the fact that Earl has impacted local producers, what does this mean for the upcoming season?
We are looking at this very, very closely in terms of trying to strike the delicate balance between matching domestic production with domestic needs. And we are for example, on tomatoes, that we have a difficulty right now. There are certain vegetables that we would not want to open. So more than likely what we will do is to import it through the BMDC at cost and provide it. Why? Because if we open the floodgates for some of the vegetables that are produced easily, we know what will happen. We will end up having higher incidences of contraband, etc. So we're trying to balance it very delicately, taking on in view the needs of the consumers, but also to the needs of the farmers. What we have done, the primary aid provided by government has been to the vegetable producers.
Okay.
We have another line hopefully coming on stream quite shortly on for the covered structures, the tropical greenhouses, from the Chilean through UNDP, at which we will again be addressing vegetable production.
All right, so as you said, that's where most of the aid is going post-Earl into vegetable producers, and that's being able to stabilize the environment so they can produce their crops.
Most of the active in terms of direct aid, yes, but there's also work being done at the banks, in particular DFC, to try to reschedule loans, etc. With the producers that require such. So there's a joint approach to try and aid the recovery effort.
Now, I like one of the questions I think Jima was looking at was looking at the adaptations that have to be done. And this is not unique to just the agricultural sector, it's across the board. Everyone has realized just how temperamental the environment now is, and where when we expect rains, we don't necessarily get rains. When we expect dry season, we get extreme drought. Or the frequency or strength of storms that come in our direction. Looking from a research perspective, and just in terms of the work of the Ministry of Agriculture, how can you work with farmers and the agricultural sector to help them realize that while there has been traditional farming practices, we also need to look at the possibility of things not functioning under the very same environment?
Well, of course, there's a lot of opportunity in the region, not even going too far internationally, but within the Caribbean and Central America, there's been a lot of initiative to develop farming systems that could cope with the changing environment. And we're bringing the conversation full circle to the World Food Day.
Yeah.
And if you look at the theme for World Food Day this year, it's climate is changing, food and agriculture must too. So the question you just presented is being considered at our level, including within the Ministry of Agriculture, and we are preparing farmers to be able to deal with that. So for example, when you come to World Food Day this Friday on the Agriculture and Trade Showgrounds, most of the booths, all of the participants, the displays that you will be able to see are geared towards encouraging not only farmers, because we're also inviting a lot of young people, students, to be on the showgrounds this Friday to try to highlight some of those areas where you need to be climate smart and prepare for the eventuality of storms. And well, not only storms, but when you talk about drought and those things, you also have to be prepared for that as well.
Melissa, let's hear from you in terms, you are a project officer, but you're also the FAO liaison. Are there any unique practices that are taking place in Belize that are perhaps good examples for others in the region in terms of climate adaptation? Or are we now urging our farmers to take up those practices?
No, I think, morning everybody, and thanks for being here. I think the Ministry of Agriculture and the actual people on the ground, the farmers on the ground, have adopted to the cover structures, which Gary has mentioned, which is a form of making efforts to mitigate their climate actions. So we talk also about rainwater harvesting. We talk about drought and that kind of thing. So I'm excited to showcase what the showgrounds will have for that. We also look at drainage as one of those, as a situation that you can mitigate against in terms of practices now. Our farmers and young people in general is the group that we're trying to target. Aquaculture having above ground containers rather than pond is also an option, and that are being practices that we have going on. So yes.
From the perspective of the ministry, how do you promote agriculture as a business? I know a lot of young people, they're not looking to become a farmer as a career path, but how do you promote that sense that it can be very viable as a business, it contributes to our economy? How do you promote that?
I think overall the sector contributes roughly about $650 million a year in terms of output. What we tend to always look at are the export figures, which fluctuate because of commodity prices. But in reality, you have the likes of poultry, which is 110 million. You have cattle, which is about the same. The grain sector, which is close to 50 million. So there's quite a bit of investments in the ground. The reality is that while we go on vacation once or twice a year, we have to eat 3 times a day. So there's always room and there's always a business opportunity there. The key at this point in time is for us to the whole issue of climate smart agriculture. One of the major issues we're looking at a macro level is a water management plan for the country. But when we started that plan in terms of looking at surface water collection, we found out that we don't have appropriate topographic maps. So it's not until later this year that we're supposed to finally acquire the proper topographic maps, and then we can begin to plan on a macro scale. But in the past, we've tend to look at the sector on an enterprise level, at a farm level, but I think climate change is forcing us to look at it on a macro scale, which we're doing. But even at the enterprise level, the likes of the protected structures, the tropical, the bell tunnel houses, it's actually an adaptation of what is in effect greenhouses for the Belize situation, very cost effective, and it's catching on very well. That's providing farmers the ability to control water, to control insects, and you get a far better quality crop product to the market, and almost year round. We're also looking at for example, drought-tolerant corn, drought-tolerant varieties, and as Melissa mentioned, the issue of drainage. It is a big picture issue that we have to deal with, but there will always be risk involved. What we need to also do to in parallel to that are some of the enterprise level fill in some of the gaps that we don't have right now, but those are big issues like disaster fund. Crop insurance is beyond all of our producers at this point in time. Commercial crop insurance, it's very expensive, so we have to look at the provision of the construction of a disaster fund.
Would you, sorry, I wanted to clarify something, and I think it's pretty key because Melissa spoke about seeing some of it at the World Food Day presentation. Is water management our greatest threat at this point in time in terms of looking at climate adaptation?
I would say water management, disease control.
And disease control.
Both of them are, and we don't normally think of disease control as a climate issue, but it is.
Well, we've seen illnesses from other parts of the world now in this region, so I'd imagine the same takes place with crops.
And just look at exactly what you're saying, look at the human element. We don't have a quote-unquote flu season any longer. It happens just about all year round. Huh?
That's right. So when you spoke about innovative water management practices, the first thing that comes to mind for me is VATS, right? You talked about harvesting rainwater. Is that what we need to do, kind of go back to some of the older practices that we used to have?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we take it for granted now. You could remember back in the days, each home had a what you call a vat at the time in your backyard. You don't see that anymore. So companies have adjusted. The private sector has made some of these. You asked about small farmers and so on, how it can be accessible. So we're working together with those departments and so on, and that's where the research unit comes in. They test those innovations and practices and make it available for farmers to see.
That's at a small scale, but then you also have the likes of investments, for example, in Blue Creek, where there's one farmer putting in a 200-acre water reservoir, because that's the amount of water he requires for the year. And while it sounds...
It's a huge investment.
yes, it is, but there we have somebody looking at the long-term future. He is in it for the business. And those are the levels of investment that we require to safeguard the
But
long-term
is there
future.
access to capital? I know that you've worked very closely with DFC and some of the other funding agencies in terms of looking at agricultural sector and offering support there, but we know farmers are always the first to tell you when they can't produce their crop, they can't meet their financial obligations. Is there access to capital to be able to make these types of investments?
As I said, we have some gaps that we need to fill.
Yeah.
There is access to capital, but what we want to do is to build on some pilot projects that the DFC, for example, already offering towards climate smart, both agriculture, but investment on a whole, and to incentivize the investments required in irrigation and these sorts of reservoir building because at the end of the day, you're mitigating a risk, thereby ensuring that you'll be able to pay them back.
Now, I heard one phrase, which I know will probably alert some people, and you spoke about damage-resistant crop. And I'll bring this over in terms of the research area, because we know that there has been a growing movement against GMO seeds or crops in the country, and we have been told numerous times that there are already some of the products that are available in country that have been genetically modified. Where are we in terms of the options we're looking at when we talk about crops that are resistant or resilient to the changes we're seeing?
Well, in reference to the various varieties of crops that we evaluate in the country, none of them are GMO or genetically modified crops. As a matter of fact, and CEO could probably elaborate on this, the new Baja facilities in Central Farm have been equipped with equipment that we could take samples from the field, bring them into the lab to test for GMO as part of that monitoring program.
So we don't have GMO products in the country?
No.
Grown locally?
We have not allowed GMO to come in. It is not the intention of the government of Belize to open to GMO. As a matter of fact, but I'll give Gary a chance to discuss some of the market opportunities.
So, for example, what we do is that a number of the varieties, for just the traditional commodities, cabbage, tomatoes, sweet peppers, that sort of thing, varieties are a huge issue. It could easily be the difference between making a good return on your investment or failing because of selecting the right varieties. So a large part of what we do in Central Farm, for example, is to access the different varieties that are available, and we do evaluation both in Central Farm and on farm with selected farmers, where we could look at the performance of the different crops that is available. For example, one tomato variety versus another. If you go to the market, for example, you would notice that you could get a rung, which is the table tomato, but there's also the Roma tomato, which is a little more oblong. So that has been the result of varietal evaluation, because those tomato are a little more flavored than the table tomato. So
and
we introduced that to farmer. Correct.
So having drug-tolerant crops isn't necessarily doesn't mean
it's not changing
the practice of traditional crop breeding still exists across the world.
So it's like when you cross-pollinate your flowers?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay.
For example, one of the things that we are just about to embark on in Central Farm is to collect what is considered heirloom varieties of tomato, the one that your grandfather and grandmother traditionally grow in the garden, that you could just collect seeds and just, for example, in okras, you see it a lot of time where you could just collect the seeds and replant. So we are setting up facilities in Central Farm to be able to collect the tomato varieties that used to grow 15 years ago, to be able to multiply the seeds, and it will transition into our disaster relief program that we could go into our seed bank, for example, to be able to distribute seeds immediately after a disaster rather than depending on seeds being imported for our relief program.
But I believe too, Gary, what needs to be highlighted is that we've had success with an open pollinated corn, which is being promoted to especially small farmers, so they could produce seed, and they do have a constant supply of open pollinated corn seed that we don't have to be importing. So we're not really going GMO. The issue of GMO, for example, and the discussion has come full circle in the sense that, yes, we were having quite a bit of pressure in the past to acquiesce to the importation of GMO. Now we are working towards exporting poultry to the Caribbean, to Trinidad in particular. And the niche that we're hoping to get there is a non-GMO market. The prices are actually better.
Yeah. Now, we're quickly running out of time, and I really want to get into your activities for World Food Day. And I'm glad that we were able to touch on the topic, which is the general theme of climate adaptation. But how will you be celebrating it in country?
Well, World Food Day, this is the 36th year that the world celebrates World Food Day under the Food and Agriculture Organization. It marks that organization be formed, and countries like Belize commit to end world hunger at some time. The state is that it's within our lifetime, so we imagine that's another 100 years or so. But what we expect to see and what we want, because I'll be there as well, so I invite all of you to come, is that the day will showcase over 50 participants coming, meaning booths we have set up. We have the NGO community, we have the private sector, we have the ministries, the different departments, the Departments of Environment, Forestry, Fisheries, Ministry of Agriculture for sure will be making a showcase. The UNDP office, the Climate Change office, and they're bringing partners or actual groups of small enterprises that you mentioned, small farmers coming in, showcasing their products as well, and some of the investments that they have been making towards climate adaptation. So it's going to be a fun day. We don't know if there'll be school on Friday, but as a result, we ask that the kids can come out, parents can bring them and enjoy the day.
That continues their out-of-school education.
Yes, yes.
Every year we've been taking World Food Day to the various academic institutions, and usually we give out about 2,000 to 3,000 seedlings every year, so that the kids could go out and actually plant at home. Yeah. And we're hoping that indeed, even if there's no formal school, maybe that might give them a better opportunity to come out and see firsthand and spend a little more time with us to see the prospects for agriculture.
So if you were to give us some clear definitive actions that individuals can do to contribute towards the zero hunger generation, what would that be?
Well, the issue of, and you alluded to it earlier, a part of being climate smart is really going back to those things that we used to do in the past that are good. So rainwater harvesting at home, but rainwater harvesting for a backyard garden, for example, at home, to subsidize. For example, when you look at the income for the family, for a particular month, if you have a backyard garden, then that amount of funds,
savings.
exactly.
Yeah.
When you take the commodities from the backyard into the kitchen, that the monies that would typically be spent at the market does not have to leave the household, or could be transitioned to another part of the expense for the household. So going backyard garden, for example, is one.
And using a van.
Exactly. The issue of urban garden is something that we've been talking to the various Tongan City Council to see how we could take empty lots and try to transition them into places where people could go and volunteer their time, and then that would then translate into them taking home a few commodities that could then incorporate into what it is they have to eat. But it also means improving their nutritional benefits at home.
You took it out of my mouth. I was just going to say the nutrition part of things, we do have, again, the Diabetes Association, Kidney Association, PAHO, Dr. Polanco would murder me to not mention the participation from them. But yes, the nutrition part of things, if we grow the food that we eat and consume, it's much more healthier, and we have a better life.
Farm to table.
And these,
yes.
The staff, I must commend them, they're pushing into some of the non-traditional areas. For example, this year we had a very unique collaboration with the police department in Balmopan to deal with at-risk youths, for them to spend a week being exposed to all aspects of agriculture. I think it was 75 kids or somewhere there.
Nice.
That they came out. They spent time at the garden in Central Farm. At the showgrounds. but we also took them to Central Farm, to Banana Bank, and really exposing at-risk youths. And we believe that there is so much potential in those sorts of programs.
All right. Well, we want to say thank you for joining us this morning. Of course, World Food Day celebration is going to be on Friday. And
It starts at 9 a.m. Opening ceremony is officially at 10, and it's going to be until 4. So we have all day to come out, and I said about 50 booths, participating organizations, lots of displays related to the theme, climate is changing, and of course food and agriculture must too.
And
you
where
can
will it
also
be?
get your seedlings to
Yes,
start your own
yes,
backyard garden.
yes.
So that's enough of a reason to go.
And where will it be?
At the National Agriculture and Trade Showgrounds in Belmopan.
Belmopan.
Yes.
Great. And with that, we've concluded this segment of our show. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, it's to be joined by representatives of UNICEF to talk about breaking the barriers for an inclusive society for children with disabilities. So stay tuned.